and she voted in every single election. And she voted in every election up until the last one, when she appeared to vote in Chattanooga, and she had her ID. And yet, in the last election in Ohio, he was denied the right to vote because now these women have been voting in the same place at the same time for years and years and years, but because they didn't have the kind of ID prescribed by the Indiana law, they were denied the vote as well. I could go on. And it sounds like I'm telling you about how this voter ID requirement will hurt seniors. It will. But not only seniors, it'll hurt students. It'll hurt low-income people. In the last Wisconsin election, it was demonstrated that about 78% of all the African-American males between 18 and 24 didn't have an ID. Now that sounds like a startling statistic, even a little hard to believe. But it does tell you that there's a whole group of Americans who were denied the right to vote because they didn't have an ID. They were sane, they were legally authorized to vote based on criminal records. They had all the prescriptions that the people who wrote the 14th, 15th, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and the 24th Amendment banning poll tax, they had all those things, all those boxes checked, but they didn't have. And that is whether we're going to vote for this state or not. One of the things I hope to do tonight, we want to defend it, but also to talk about what we are going to do about it. Tonight is the night of personal responsibility. What are you very proud to call Steve Simon a friend. Not only is he a great lawyer, he's a state representative, and he is a good one at that too. You have a leadership position, don't you, Steve? He's the assistant leader, you know, soon to be the grand poobah. Too. I look forward to you hearing from Steve Simon. Dr. Josie Johnson, who was the first African-American regent at the University of Minnesota. Very proud of her. She's going to speak about the historic struggle of people to gain the right to vote. And then we have Thor, who is here, who's going to highlight how photo ID creates barriers for people with disabilities. And then we have Erickson, a college student and an Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran, who's going to discuss how photo ID has implications for students, veterans serving overseas. So with no further ado, please put your hands together for Steve Simon, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot for coming out on
quick summary of what happened at the legislature this year and what is before us on the ballot this November. 4 things I think you need to know. Many of you already know them. If so, first is that this is a proposed constitutional amendment. That is very important. When you put something in the Constitution, it's like we're writing in permanent ink. It's not like a regular law that goes into the law books where you can amend it, tweak it, change it, improve it, modernize it, streamline it. You can't do any of those things with a constitutional amendment. Once it's there, it's beyond our reach unless and until we amend the Constitution again. So that's important.
This isn't just a bad idea, it's a bad idea being etched basically in stone. So that's a problem, and it's something that we all need to be ever conscious of, lest we forget it. The second thing to remember about this constitutional amendment proposed is that it requires a valid government-issued photo identification. Government-issued photo identification. Why is that key? It automatically creates a bunch of divisions that don't need to exist. For example, it presumably means that if you're a student at the University of Minnesota, your ID as a student is okay. Presumably that's government issued. But if you're a student at Hamlin, or McAllister, or Carleton, or another non-public institution, presumably that's not okay. So that creates a division as well. Interestingly, other states, even very conservative states that have passed this into law, have done so with a broad range of IDs that are acceptable. And let me just read a couple of them here right now. And most of these are conservative Republican states that have enacted this. By the way, only one state in the country has enacted this by way of their constitution. Every other state has said we're going to do this by law the right way, so we can change it, tweak it, amend it, make it better. Only one state, you know what that is? Mississippi. Only Mississippi has this in their constitution. Every other state has done it by law. Anyway, back to the ID issue. In Alabama, you can use any college ID. In Arizona, you can use a bank statement or utility bill. In Florida, you can use a debit or credit card or a neighborhood association ID. Now, I'm not sure I want to live in a neighborhood that, has neighborhood association IDs, but if you have one, you can use it. The point here has to be a government-issued photo ID. Third point, for the first time in Minnesota history, in over 150 years of statehood, we will have on a mass level something called a provisional ballot, which means if you show up and you don't have what someone else considers the proper form of ID, then you vote provisionally, which means they may or may not ultimately count your vote. In Indiana, for example, when they do provisional ballots, some very small percentage of the votes are actually ever counted. So it's sort of a maybe vote, and they put it in the maybe we'll count it, maybe we won't pile. And fourth and finally, it says that all voters, including those not voting in person, must be subject to substantially equivalent identity and eligibility verification. Sounds like a mouthful, right? Substantially equivalent identity and eligibility verification. So what does that mean? Is that just a bunch of happy lawyer talk? I'll tell you what it means. It means, as many others have said throughout our state, this language means we could change same-day registration as we know it and possibly eliminate it, depending on how the ultimate outcome goes. Why? Because right now, we use different procedures to verify those who register before the election day and those who register on the election day. There is no way that those two things, to most observers, could be considered substantially equivalent. So if they're not, if under the current system we verify and check one class of people one way and one class of people another way, that's current law, and if this says you can't do that anymore, then that in effect means that it calls into question the legitimacy and the constitutionality of same-day registration, which we have had since 1973, which is the envy of the country. Most people are trying to become us. They're not repelled by us. People in other states marvel at the fact, envy the fact, that we are usually first, second, or third in voter turnout year in and year out, and a big part of that reason is because we have same-day voter registration. Well, the existence of that going forward will be called into question. So those are the big four things that I think most citizens need to know before they vote on this November. Thanks for the opportunity, Keith.
Thank you, Steve. And great job. Josie Johnson, everybody. Click it on. I think you got to click it on.
Good evening. I am here to share a story as well about the effect that Minnesota is talking about voter ID in our great state. It reminded me of my early days in Texas. I'm a Texan. I was born there. And in 1945 and 46, my father and I traveled throughout our community. He was a precinct captain, and we went house to house gathering petitions to do away with the Texas poll tax. In those years, the poll tax law in Texas was passed in 1902. And in 1946 and 45, we were trying to get that law repealed. The law stayed in effect until 1966. And in Texas, the law continued to exist, if you can imagine, all those years of denying my ancestors the right to vote. So when we talk about voter ID in Minnesota, we really are talking about a policy that finds its origin back in the days when the effort was deliberately made to keep us, African American people, from voting. We had to pay. If you couldn't pay, then you had to cite certain phrases within the Constitution. If you couldn't do that, then you couldn't vote. So most of our people could not pay and surely could not quote sections of the Constitution because we didn't have exposure to it. I am urging that we not, as a state, follow the tradition that was created deliberately to deny us the opportunity to vote. It is unbelievable. I was here when Minnesota created the same-day registration. And as was stated earlier, Minnesota is the envy of the nation, and we have zero fraud. So we're trying to look at issues that have no reason for being. And I hope that we can talk further tonight about the impression that I have anyway about it and what we can do collectively to put Minnesota not in that camp of denying people a right to vote.
Thank you, Josie. Now, my Thor.
It's good to see a room full of people. I'm so glad you're all here. And I'm not just saying that because I work for Keith. So 20% of Minnesotans identify themselves as having a disability of some kind or another. And I just want to give you really, a really short summary of why this voter ID is not just bad in so many other ways, but because it would especially target people with disabilities and disenfranchise them from being able to vote. So people with disabilities are poor, so they can't afford to get an ID, just because when you're going to your polling place and you have to have this special ID, they can't just say, okay, today I'm going to get in my car and drive to the DMV and get this special ID, because for one thing, most people with disabilities can't drive, and then they can't afford whatever is involved in getting an ID, which is a birth certificate or marriage license or whatever. All of those things just add up, and then so it's just a burden in that sense. But at the same time, there's always that standard. And I think a lot of people don't even realize this, and maybe, African Americans who have experienced the struggle know it, but the standards are different for people with disabilities. They're always set higher, which is unfair. When you see a person go into a polling place who obviously is blind or deaf or has a cognitive disability, you're going to expect them to be able to prove their quote-unquote worthiness of being able to vote, right? So the standards are different, and I think that just to add on this photo ID requirement is an additional burden, but at the same time, since the Help America Vote Act passed after the whole Bush-Gore experience, people with disabilities have come forward and realized their potential to exercise their right to vote as citizens, because the disability community came forward at that time when the act was passed and said, if you guys are doing all these great laws to like help our, election process, put us in there and, make sure that the election process is accessible as possible, to be inclusive as possible. Especially the blind community, was involved with that. So we're just now starting to find our voice, starting to find our potential in that whole voting process. So we're really hoping that you guys vote against this amendment, because we're just getting started and we don't want to have to start from first base all over again. So thanks.
Alex. Good evening, everybody. First of all, I'd just like to say what an honor it is to be on this panel. Dr. Josie Johnson, May Thor, Representative Simon, and Congressman Ellison. It's a really, really wonderful experience. When I returned home from the Army in 2010, one of the first things I did was I reestablished my citizenship in Minneapolis. Moving out of the 6th Congressional District, where I was represented by somebody else, by Congressman Keith Ellison, so it's a real joy to be here, trust me. I am going to be graduating from the University of Minnesota this fall, if I can pass my astronomy and biology courses. Once again, I'm a student who waited to take his science credits at the very, very end, so I don't know about the applause, so we'll see how I do. And then I also spent 14 months in Baghdad in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I was a cavalry scout. It wasn't, as you can imagine, the happiest time in my life. 14 very difficult months, 2 holiday seasons away from friends, family, and loved ones. One thing I think that left a very lasting impact on me that I'll never forget was witnessing the 2009 Iraqi provincial elections in Baghdad. And by no means a model election, but I think that it's something that left something in me, and that made me realize the importance of voting rights and democracy. And to come home and to see some of those rights under attack was something that I simply wouldn't stand for, and that's why I'm here tonight. And then just very briefly, I can give you my feelings on how photo ID will impact students and veterans and active duty service members, so I'll try to do that very briefly. Simply put, what we know about voting is that youth and college voters, their experiences in voting leaves an indelible impact on them for the rest of their lives. If you vote when you're young, if you vote when you're a college student, you're very likely to become somebody who participates in our democratic process for the rest of your life. And photo ID will make voting much more difficult for college students. College students rely on same-day registration because of our open election laws, which are designed to enhance participation. They're designed to encourage participation in our democracy. And so the state of Minnesota has a good faith agreement with our colleges and universities that a photo ID from that college or university will suffice to vote. And as Representative Simon talked about, we would be creating a distinction between the state's land-grant university, the University of Minnesota, which would be a state-issued identification, and then everybody else. Students who go to Carleton, students who go to McAllister, students who go to St. Thomas. So we'd actually be creating a division between our college students. And college students are absolutely reliant on same-day registration in order to vote. Photo ID would do away with that forever. When it comes to our service members serving overseas, it shouldn't really take much of an explanation to explain why that won't work. First of all, we don't have election judges in Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's going to be very difficult to show a photo ID when you're over there. Take my word for it. This would be a very difficult process. In addition to that, while people will tell you that the federal government is in charge of military voting, which is correct, states do have the right to determine who is able to register to vote. And any further barrier that we put in our service members who are actually working the hardest, making the greatest sacrifices to sort of keep our way of life, I think that's unconscionable. And photo ID would do that, and that's why I'm very against it on behalf of service members. Finally, veterans, people who have done their time, are back home, have a unique set of circumstances. A lot of veterans are people with disabilities. A lot of veterans have problems with mobility. A lot of veterans might not be the kind of people who are predisposed to go to DMV and wait around for 8 hours to try to get a new photo ID. I think that service in Iraq or Afghanistan or Vietnam or Europe will do that to one. Also, I think that veterans are also very used to utilizing a Department of Veterans Affairs card, which does not have a current address on it. It's also a federal identification, which, as we know from the experience of other states who have implemented photo ID, these federal identifications and Veterans Affairs cards do not count. So we would be disenfranchising a whole swath of veterans who have made great sacrifices for our country. And with that, I would just pass it off to Congressman Ellison and just thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
Hey, great job, everybody. Great job, everybody. So we're going to have some discussion. We want you to ask questions. You know, whenever I do forums, I ask for the support of the folks who come to enforce the 1 minute rule. The 1 minute rule is you don't have to ask a question. And I know many of you wouldn't ask it, even if you give a disguised question, right? Long statement, then question the end. But I will ask that, will you all agree that everybody gets 1 minute to say whatever they want to say? Clap if you agree. And we have a young man right here. Stand up, my friend. Show him the 1 minute sign. He's going to be keeping time on you. He's going to be keeping time. And will you all allow me to enforce the 1 minute rule? So if anybody gets over 1 minute and starts moving on down the line, and I'm going to say, everybody agreed, and you guys are going to have my back, right? Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to say a few things before we move on, and that is, there are 175 of you in this room right now. That's good. And more coming. Let me just say this. We just got some great information, some critical information. But the real deal, the real point of this meeting tonight is to encourage and inspire you to take action. Now, you might be thinking, well, what are you talking about, Keith? What kind of action do you want? Well, first thing is to vote no on this thing. Can we count on you for that?
Hell yeah!
The second thing is to use your email list, your Twitter. What else we got? Facebook. Help me out here, Steve. Anything you got to tell everybody you know to say no. And if they want to know why, you tell them based on what you learned tonight. And if you feel like you need some backup, we got 4 really strong advocates right here and more. And we got stuff on our website. But also, who in the audience is not from St. Louis Park? Well, so that means if you want us to come to your community to talk about this topic, make us an invitation and we'll come on out. Anybody want to host something at their with their congregation or with your book club, or we'll come out and talk about it. And I'll come out to some of them, and we'll have other people do some. But we will come to your community. You let us know. Now another thing is that where's Jeremiah? You got these? That everybody say that's Elsbeth, that's Matt, that's Jeremiah. Who else? Who else has it? Patrick, Osman has some. Hold them high, guys. This crew in the back has a card, and the card says, I pledge to vote no on photo ID because I believe everybody counts, everybody matters. Take action to defeat photo ID, and then fill in your name and your information. Why do we need your name and information? Well, if you don't care to give it, that's fine. But if you do care to give it, please do, because we'll remind you right before the election. So we're going to call you and let you know we need you to remember what we talked about. And then also, it's a volunteer opportunity. Door knocks, make phone calls, write a letter to the editor, hold an event with neighbors. So we'd like you to take these and really help us to defeat this thing. Now let me just tell you, they did a poll on this thing, on this voter ID thing. And the last poll said that about 58% of Minnesotans would vote for it, which is not good news. But it's only because they don't understand how damaging it is. This thing depends upon folks saying, oh, I have ID, therefore everybody has one. Just as assumption that's wrong, right? And there are at least 200,000 Minnesotans who are registered to vote and who do not have a license or state ID. You understand? 200,000 Minnesotans who have a license, no, who do not have a license or state ID, but are registered to vote. So the folks who run around trying to take elections rather than win people over on ideas said, here's a way we can win. And I just want to say this to you. One of the main reasons they say we need this is to prevent fraud. There's no fraud, folks. There's not. I'm telling you there's no fraud. They can tell you 149 people voted in an election they weren't supposed to. Now let me tell you about that. Those are people who have felonies who were not supposed to vote and did. Nope. But they have driver's licenses. So this wouldn't have stopped that. The Ramsey County said this would cost us $2 million to implement. And they said we are laying off county workers, we're laying off law enforcement people, we are laying off nurses. They said we can't afford it. You can either have this thing that we don't need, or you can have public workers who take care of us every day. And I think we should have those public employees. What do y'all think? So the main issue today is action. Let me hear you say action. The main issue today is action. Information is nice, but action is better. I like that. So with that, let's talk. Natalie is the lovely young lady in the purple shirt. Wave your mic, Natalie. And tell me your name. You're helping us out today for the first time. Logan. Not the first time. Logan, you've been around here, right? Sorry, Logan. I turned 49 last week, Logan. Yep. Senior moment, Logan. Okay, you bet. So, Logan, I want you to stand up here so folks can see you, and it's good that you're a nice, tall, young fellow. And so, Natalie is waiting for hands, and she will recognize you as soon as she sees you. And Nat, try to get around the whole thing. 1 minute, guys, remember that. Extra credit for if you cut it before a minute. Oh, sorry, one more thing. We'll take about 5 or 6 folks, and then we'll have our panel respond. So we'll just go with Syrian for a little while.
Thank you so much. My name is Catherine Thor. I'm a Minneapolis Assistant Chair Election Judge, and I have been very concerned about getting a good message out there that works on people who don't know about this or are needing, like you said, for this. I have found a couple things that work all the time. First of all, to say permanently writes discrimination into the Minnesota Constitution. We cannot have this. And another way is to say 1/3 of all Minnesota eligible voters could possibly not be able to vote. And then there's some things you can say about the military as was described. I also want to thank Representative Simon for leading the charge, for standing up and being fearless during the legislative session just passed. My last point is this morning on the Governor's Task Force on Election Integrity, which I attended, the Republicans are now planning to link the photo ID implementing legislation with the bill that we are going to see coming up on the felon voting rights to fix the problems we know about that exist with the felons who vote when they shouldn't. And we cannot have this. These have to be 2 separate bills through the legislature. Thank you so much.
I know it's hard for me to keep it down for a minute, but I'll do it. You know, I think that it's commendable and necessary that we deal with the problem here in Minnesota, but the problem is national. At the ex-chair of the Republican Party, or to say that in deposition, that they sat down with a group and a consulting firm that talked to them about stopping black people from voting. Not in my adult life, and I'm 60, has blacks had unfettered access to the voting polls. I got 30 seconds. And so what I'm saying is that not only do we need a constitutional amendment guaranteeing voting for all citizens, an absolute rate, that we need a constitutional challenge to groups like ALEC, the Republican Government Association, or the RNC to sit in back rooms and decide whether or not me or anybody else is going to have the right to vote.
Gertrude Hillary Richfield. I'm sure Keith knows that the League of Women Voters has been very staunchly opposed this amendment.
Yes, they have.
And since the founding of the League in 1920, we have had two missions. One, to get every citizen out to vote, and number two, to educate citizens. And as vice chair of the Richfield League of Women Voters, I think that I can promise you that we can have a panel like this in Richfield.
Okay, well, let's do it. Let's do it.
I'm Ira Matz from St. Anthony, and the question I have is, we have candidates debate when they're going for elective office. Why can't we have issue debates with the opposition? Because what we're going to lose, how we're going to lose this issue is the low information voter who doesn't become interested until after Labor Day, and they understand it as a common sense issue. It's simply common sense that people should show voter ID when they have to show ID to buy, beer or cigarettes or anything else. That's the issue we're going to be dealing with. And since it is controversial, why can't we move it into a controversial venue like a debate?
This is an excellent idea, and I think that this is an idea that's very well taken. What do you guys think about that? So we've taken now 4, right? Okay, take one more.
Hello. Basically, I have a question to ask. I'd like more information about, I know we don't have a provisional ballot in Minnesota now, and I know we don't want it, but I forget why. So if you can explain more about the provisional ballot, I appreciate it.
Okay. Good. So let's answer some of the questions. Let's start with the provisional. Anybody on the panel want to grab that one? You want to?
So provisional ballots, the maybe vote. The problem with the maybe vote is just that. You don't know whether your vote's going to count or not unless you, under one version, when this was a bill, before it was a proposed constitutional amendment, it was, well, if you either don't have an ID or you don't have the right kind of ID as determined by an election judge or a poll challenger or whatever, then within a week you have to present that correct right ID at your county auditor's office. Now, for those of us who live in Hennepin County, that means going downtown, paying outrageous parking prices, going to the government center, and going to your county auditor. But if you live in greater Minnesota, going to your county auditor means taking the day off of work, oftentimes. If you're in Coochin County, if you're in another large landmass in Minnesota, that's a really, really big deal. Now, it didn't have to be this way. In the legislature, for the last 2 years, some of us floated a compromise. I think a common sense compromise, which is if you're going to have a provisional ballot, if we have to have such a thing, then why not just have someone who either didn't bring an ID or doesn't have the right kind of ID, simply sign an affidavit, a sworn statement, right there at the polling place like they do in South Dakota, which says, I am who I say I am under penalty of perjury and under a potential prison sentence of at least a year. That seems to me to put real teeth into the idea that we want people to be who they say they are. That makes sense to me. That's one way to do a provisional ballot, but that's not the way this is doing a provisional ballot. This is saying if you don't have it, you can't swear an oath, you can't sign a statement, you can't declare anything under a penalty of perjury. Instead, it's a provisional maybe ballot.
Mike, go ahead.
Can I make a request? When you speak, would you mind standing up or listening to disembodied voices? And it's really hard.
Well, mine's not able to stand up, so.
What? Well, you stand up and nobody sees you anyway.
Yeah, you gotta it takes one to know one, right? Okay, we'll stand up. But one of our speakers is in a wheelchair. You understand that? Okay, so Mike, go right ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So just to add on to what Representative Simon said about the provisional ballots, so when we're having these discussions with our friends, families, neighbors after tonight, which I hope everybody will, a provisional ballot is going to cost, okay? That's something that within this whole education about the voter ID issue, nobody understands. And I'm telling people, as I do my phone banks and I'm just talking to people, when Republicans think that it's a free ID in order to go vote because, you know, everybody has an ID, and everybody should have, you know, show an ID when they vote, well, it's really not free. And it doesn't even say that in the amendment. So it is misleading, which is why there was that lawsuit, right? So it's going to come out of taxpayers' money to get this. And you can ask any city clerk or county auditor, elections take a lot of work. It's not just a bunch of people show up to the polling places and, you know, the ballots are automatically there. It takes a lot of work to print them. It takes a lot of work for city clerks to train their election judges. And it's going to have to, all of this is going to have to be done all over again if this amendment passes. And the ballots are going to have to be printed every election. And it's going to cost, no matter what people think it will cost. And so a provisional ballot is going to just actually create more work for your city auditor, your city clerks and county auditors, and it's going to come out of all of our pockets. So spread that around. When people are trying to say, yeah, it's good for us to have photo ID, it's not good when it comes to your pocket.
Well, Mike, you know, it's been widely predicted that it will raise property taxes because the federal government's not paying for this free ID. The state government, if you haven't heard, is going to short on money. And so where's it going to come from? It's going to come out of property taxes. Okay, so that means you're not getting your street plowed so that we can have this, we can stop fraud that doesn't exist. It doesn't make sense. You got to explain this stuff to folks. And I also want to say, you know, we've had 2 elections. One of them was settled by 8,700 votes. The other one by 312 votes. If you introduce provisional ballots, what it means is massive uncertainty for a long amount of time. I mean, the good thing about the elections is when they're over, they're over. But if you introduce provisional ballots, it won't be, the end will be only the beginning of the nightmare. So, and by the way, 2 close squeaker elections, no fraud found. So, Alex, here, Josie wants to stand.
Part of the conversation tonight was raised by the brother on this side who reminded us of the rationale for suddenly the desire on the part of most states to have voter ID. Now, I think it's very important. I'm not minimizing the issues that are clearly there, and that has to do with those that have been identified so far. But my friends, if you can keep in the back of your mind, if nothing else, the rationale for all of this and the fear that I have and many like me have of taking our democracy back, this is an issue that should have been resolved and was in 1965, 66. Which said that it's a constitutional right for people to vote. Now we have got to know all the other legal and the kinds of concerns that people have and governments have and our state representatives in arguing a point. Please remember, the rationale for this is simple. It's to deny people who have control in many cases of the numbers and the encouragement of voting and exercising their right, to deny them that opportunity. And let's be really clear about the other parts of it, but please know that's the basis. And all of these states, 33 states in our country, have raised these issues. That's serious. And it's, in my judgment, truly fearful. I'm worried about our democracy and where we will go if we follow some of these procedures.
Okay, so, I think everybody likes that idea about the debate. Any other unaddressed issues? I think we covered them all. Nami, do you best.
I'll stand up so that everyone can see. Tom Lehman, I live a block away. I want to put a face on this. My mother, Virginia Lehman, is 93 years old. She worked hard her whole life, paid taxes. My mother's 93 years old, Virginia Lehman. She and my father had a farm. They raised food that helped feed troops during World War II. Greatest generation. 20 years ago, her eyes started to fail. She has macular degeneration. She has no driver's license. She has no passport. She has no government ID. She moved into a nursing home to be close to my sister, so she's far from her county of birth. So running to the courthouse to get a birth certificate is not something that's easy to do. She's not going to be allowed to vote after working her whole life in this country if this thing passes, because she has no voter ID. If you have a grandparent, or a parent, or a great aunt, or a great uncle, or a friend in a nursing home, or a friend who's a senior, someone in your congregation who's elderly, tell them they're not going to be allowed to vote if this thing goes forward. And I think seniors are a real key part of this.
Thanks, Tom.
Phil Freshman, I'm one of the 10 people from St. Louis Park here. Steve's from St. Louis. Anyway, a couple questions. I know that former Vice President Mondale and former Governor Carlson are leading the charge to defeat this amendment, this proposition on the ballot. I know that there have been court challenges. The State Supreme Court has been hearing back and forth on this issue, and I also know that there have been, we're trying to get the word out as with forums like this. I'd like to know what the status is today of the efforts, legal efforts, to defeat this proposition, keep it from even being on the ballot, and how the wording is going to be changed, if at all, on the ballot.
Okay, let's take 4 more. Your question's noted. That's a good question.
Randall Pike, St. Anthony. Back in the days when I used to protest the war in Iraq, I made my own personal sign, and it was always the most favorite sign of anybody at the demonstration. And what it said was, it wasn't faulty intelligence, it was a lie. And that's the message that we have to convey here. The notion that we need this to prevent voter fraud isn't a good faith mistake, it's a lie. It's as big a lie as the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. This is there for the purpose of keeping people who don't vote Republican from voting. And any other explanation is a lie, and that's the message that we have to convey from between now and November.
Just to further what this gentleman just said, especially for the folks, for the press that are here as well, that there's not two sides to this. It's not both sides. This has strictly come about because an African American is president, and the majority of the people who voted for him are going to be disenfranchised the most for this. So let's just, this isn't both sides doing it. Having said that, what else can we do? I tend to get complacent sometimes. I didn't write to the legislature. I didn't write to you, Steve, because I live in your district. I go, oh, I know how Steve's going to vote on this. I know how Congressman Ellison's going to vote on it. What else can we do? On a side note, I'm a capitalist. I own the domain name to voteridsucks.com. No voterid.com, because I bought it a year ago when this started coming up and thought, you know, someone, not to make money, but if I had the wherewithal, I would make that a clearinghouse of some sort. Where can we go to get more information? What else can we do?
Good. Excellent question.
topic for him last year. And when you talk about the visa bill or the credit card bill, I was 32 years old before I finally got credit. So that would be a lot of elections that I would have been able to vote in from 18 to 32. So I might have a driver's license, but even if I didn't have a driver's license, I'm thinking if I'm running for office and I have the best ideas out there, why would I be worried if any of you voted, right? I wouldn't want to eliminate votes because I have the best idea that would benefit everybody. So if I don't have the best ideas, I would want to start eliminating who's voting. So anyway, that's why I think it's very, and I cut it short too, extra credit.
Thanks. I have two quick questions. One is, if a person does not vote for the voter ID, is it going to be a yes vote or a no vote or
Good question.
nothing? And the other thing is, this is the task at hand, but it seems to me that this is a way for the legislators who don't get their way to sneak in and make the people legislate instead of doing their job in legislating. Is there a way we can make it harder for the legislature to pass off lawmaking onto the people when we elected them to do it? And the governor was elected to be able to veto it. So we have a republic with a democratic system. It seems like this is kind of unfair to put something like this to the people.
I think we got one more. Let's take one more question. See, Natalie's doing her best. Natalie, just yeah, there you go.
Hello, I came in a little bit late, so this question may have already been asked, I don't know. But if this voter ID goes through, how is that going to affect our servicemen overseas? How is it going to affect our students that are going to other colleges out of state? How is this going to affect any seniors, anybody who can't afford to get their birth certificate? I know I just ordered mine from Iowa, and it was $25.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's an extra cost.
That's and $25 on a fixed income is a lot of money.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so now let's answer some of the questions. And thanks everybody for being patient with Natalie. Trust me, she's trying to get to you. So, what do you guys say? What's the legal status, Steve, or anybody?
Well, the legal status is basically it's within the province of the Supreme Court right now. Oh, you want me to stand? Okay. The Supreme Court has a couple of cases before it that have to do with the legitimacy of this. One is whether the title has been correctly or legitimately stated by Secretary Ritchie. The other issue, more interesting to me, is whether the question that is going to the voters is a full and fair and accurate description of what's on there. Now, we've talked about what's in there, and at the beginning I told you the 4 things to look at. But the question that the legislature passed that is going to the voters, because after all, on the ballot, you don't have the actual amendment before you, you just have a summary in question form. And the summary basically says, I don't have it right in front of me, basically says, should people have to show ID to vote? Something like that. Well, nowhere in that question does it inform voters of the fact that it's a government-issued ID, that there are going to be these new creatures called provisional ballots. There are a host of other things that the question doesn't talk about. So now the question is, if the court agrees that it is a misleading question, then what? There's a range of remedies. The most, I guess, extreme remedy would be to say it's off the ballot. That's what they did in Missouri. There are other remedies. The court could say, you know, the question is faulty. We're not going to kick it off the ballot. Instead, we're going to rewrite the question, we, the Supreme Court. Or they could say, we're not going to kick it off the ballot, but the legislature, you get another crack at it. The only problem there is we're not in session right now. But the point is there's a range of remedies if the court decides that the question is somehow illegitimate. We'll see. I expect an answer by next couple weeks or so.
The next question was, what can we do, and what are good sources of information? And who's the gentleman who asked that? The domain name guy. Yeah. Go to, and you know what, I feel like I had failed you guys by not having a list of good sources, but I'll tell it to you. And Matt, we got to get them online. Where's Matt? We got to get them online. The Brennan Center is perhaps the Cadillac of information on voter ID. The Brennan Center. They're great. There's a BRENNAN, the Brennan Center. It's connected with New York University. And do you know another one?
Yeah, there's the National Conference on State Legislatures.
The National Conference on State Legislatures. For those of you who didn't hear Josie, the National Conference on State Legislatures, sources of information. League of Women Voters.
OurVoteOurFuture.org. That's the coalition to defeat the photo ID amendment.
Our Vote Our Future. So write them down, you guys. And you know what? My campaign is going to get a list of all these good sources of information and shoot them out to everybody. So please leave us with your email. That'd be very helpful.
And don't forget, we have the Take Action Minnesota right here. That has brought together a lot of organizations to try to make a united effort on this voter ID.
But let me also say, if you have a good list of emails, this is something I say to folks all the time, because people say to me a lot, how come nobody is doing anything about, and then name whatever. I say, look, we are saying it, but it's just not getting through. So what we need people to do is to take communication on as a personal responsibility. You know, I got 30,000 people on my congressional Twitter account, so I can give a 140-character message anytime I want to a whole lot of folks. But you got people on your Twitter account, you got people on your Facebook, you got people who you know, you got a phone book. We need you to get on it. Because the last poll had it about 58% for it. Be creative. That domain thing, I love it. That domain name thing, keep thinking of stuff like that, because I guarantee you, the answer is in our hands. We just got to mine it out. And then another question was, is a non-vote a no vote or a yes vote?
A non-vote is a no vote. So if you leave it blank, if you otherwise vote and you leave it blank, or a person leaves it blank, that is counted as a no. And we're kind of unique in that sense. And that could be the difference maker in elections like this. In particular, it could be the difference maker, by the way, in, quick story, Proposition 8 in California, remember the gay marriage thing that passed in 2008? Under the Minnesota rule in California, Prop 8 would have gone down. So it's worth a few percentage points.
Yeah, very good. So now let me just say this. The young lady asked, how is this going to affect students, service people, and seniors? And that she sent out for her ID, cost her $25 bucks. It was a lot of dough. Let me tell you. Alex, you want to elaborate on that?
Yes, this would impact students quite negatively since they typically tend to rely on same-day registration. It's the Secretary of State's opinion that same-day registration would be abolished under photo ID. That's a lot of college students. Also, as Representative Simon pointed out during the legislature, the poor wording of the amendment and the term state-issued ID means that there would be a hierarchy between University of Minnesota students and students attending private colleges and universities and students attending colleges and universities out of state. Also for service members, this would end absentee balloting as we know it. So there's really your answer for service members. Also, the states have the power to determine who's able to register, and any barriers that we put on registering to vote would impact our service members overseas.
So if you're walking around Kandahar trying to, wearing the uniform of the United States, somebody's scheming to keep you from voting, that is galling to me. That is beyond description wrong. So let's keep marching down the line.
Hi, my name is Carla. I'm from Minneapolis. Keith said that the percentage that are going to vote yes right now is 58. When this was first introduced, it was closer to 80%. And what's made the difference is education. I did phone calling through Take Action. For every 3 phone calls I made, I changed one mind. That's 1 out of 3. And what that means, but here's the bad news, guys. If this wins, it's our fault. What that means is that we can turn this around.
Great.
Mike?
It's working.
Mike and in St. Louis Park. First of all, to our Muslim friends and neighbors, Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak.
Walaikum salam.
My wife is an election judge, and she said very plainly that she's not an expert on photo IDs, and every college kid knows that they know how to do that. Also, photo ID is going to take a lot of time in the polls and line. And she said she and many other election judges talked about it. Photo ID pass, they are no longer going to be election judges. That's something they are no longer volunteering to do. So that's going to cause some problems. And don't forget the primaries next Tuesday. We could lose our very good representative to a Tea Party person. So please get out and vote Tuesday.
All right. Thank you.
Not a question, but I do want to remind people that tomorrow is National Night Out. For those of you who are having block parties, make sure that you contact your neighbors and talk about this issue, because many don't understand how it is going to work. Okay?
Very good.
Hello, my name is David Perlman. If you still have yesterday's Sunday newspaper, there will be a letter to the editor written by me, above Arnie Carlson and below Polly Mann. My letter said, in response to Catherine Kirsten, who's calling Richie names, that she's right. We need to have a clear, concise title. I suggest, shall the Constitution be modified to make it more difficult for Democrats to vote? One more thing. 30 seconds, I can do this. I'm 69 years old. I remember the voter registration drives in the South. Some of my friends went there. I did a little bit. Some people I know got killed. We need a backup plan. The backup plan is a new voter registration drive. If this thing passes, we got to get out there and register those 200,000 people who are going to be disenfranchised.
That's right. That's right.
My name is Patrick Kegley, Minneapolis. I just want to point out one other thing. I found that when I went to re-register on Secretary of State, they won't allow you to sign at the end. You fill out the whole form, but you have to be in person to sign. So there's no way of doing it online. So, just for information, go to find your auditor or somebody at the polling place. Thank you.
All right. And Natalie, try to hang on to the mic. All right.
First of all, the primary is a really good time for people to register to vote. Okay, that's an opportunity. If you're going to be voting for the primary, that's a good time. So the other question that I have is about what Representative Steve Simon said about provisional ballots. Does that count for 2012, or is that that's for elections after this election? Okay. Then the other question is that Alex talked about absentee voting would go away for service personnel if this amendment passed. Would it go away for everybody? In other words, would all absentee ballots go away in this new provision?
Yeah, we're writing the questions down. Did we get 5 yet?
I think we're at
Okay, let's take your.
My name is Borla Thomas. I voted in for the last 24 years. I have only shown my ID at my polling place maybe 2 to 4 times in those 24 years. I do carry an ID with me, but very seldom do I show it. Do I show it at a bank? Do I show it at a bar? Or anything like that, because it's difficult for me sometimes to pull it off my wallet. So it is definitely going to disenfranchise me from voting, because I typically, I just moved as well. So I typically wouldn't pre-register to vote. I would vote on the day I go to my poll. I would register the day I go to my polling place. But luckily for me, somebody pre-registered me to vote already at my new residence. They pre-register my wife as well. So I won't have no problem, but there's many of people like me that are going to have problems. So we need to defeat this now, and we need to realize this is a bad thing for people with disabilities.
Right, thanks, Derek. Okay, so let's ask our panel if they want to address any of these questions. There's a question, would absentee voting go away for all people? Does anybody? One thing I want to say about that, and I want to admit, I'm not sure I know the answer, but I will say that there's a lot of unanswered questions with regard to this thing. Right, so they're trying to get us to basically vote for something, and then they're going to tell us the facts about it later on. And so
That's the reason the Secretary of State is trying carefully to outline exactly what the amendment said. So the fact that we don't know that is a critical awareness right now. So we all need to go online and figure that out. Because I've often wondered, I haven't had a chance to vote absentee often, but I'm not sure even my absentee vote gets counted unless it's a close election. But that is why we need to support the Secretary of State's rewording the amendment, because in it he has identified every possible meaning for the idea.
Alex, you want to add to that?
Can everybody hear me? Okay. Just something the woman in the back said that she had heard that at the beginning polls were about 80% in favor of photo ID, now they're 58%. What we know is that the more conversations we had with everyday Minnesotans about photo ID, the more that they realize that this is a partisan, cynical strategy to disenfranchise people. So if you want to do something, go talk to them or go Just another thing that was floating out in the crowd that I thought was very important to address is what can I do? You can come to an event that's being held by Take Action Minnesota, in partnership with SEIU, Isaiah, Our Vote, Our Future, and a whole bunch of other folks, which will be actually emceed by the wonderful Dr. Josie Johnson. That's Saturday, August 25th, and we'll teach you all you need to know about getting out there and talking to people. It's also in partnership with the New Organizing Institute, who you might know as being the folks who engineered President Barack Obama's 2008 victory and the grassroots tools he used to win. Also, finally, a note on provisional ballots. There's been a little bit of confusion tonight. What we do know is, that, according to the Brennan Center actually, is that 1/3 of provisional ballots are never counted, which is a pretty lousy batting average. Also, in 2012, in the instant election era, we know who's won and lost, or so we think. So who's going to go and cast their ballot when they know that their candidate already lost, presumably? I mean, that's like putting New Jersey on after the Super Bowl, right? So we're not just disenfranchising those one and through voters, we're also disenfranchising everybody who says, hey, my gal or my guy lost by 400 votes. I'm not going to go bother to go certify my provisional ballot, especially in some of these down-ticket races where the margins of victory or defeat are very narrow. And as we know, sometimes in statewide elections, that could be very devastating. That could alter a lot of elections. Also, finally, what people have said about what works, how do I talk to people, use narrative. Talk about your own stories. Everybody in this room knows somebody here on this panel, somebody in this crowd, maybe it's you yourself. You know somebody to be affected by photo ID. Tell them that story. That's what we know works. I mean, it's great to have the numbers, and it's great to have the Supreme Court, maybe putting the amendment on the full ballot, maybe changing the title. That's great, but we can't rely on them to fight our battles. We have to do that. Okay? So we are the people that need to make the difference. So turn up the heat. Also, I tell you that if we lose on photo ID, we're going to lose about a lot of things that we care about. If you want a school system whose outcomes aren't based on race and class, you need to vote no on photo ID. If you want a green environmental policy, you need to vote no on photo ID. If you want a strong Minnesota where people have the right to negotiate with their employers, vote no on photo ID. I'm telling you folks, if we are able to shrink our electorate, we're going to be losing a lot more than on just the right to vote.
That was excellent.
And by the way, my campaign manager told me to tell you that if you go to keithellison.org/vote no, we have pledge cards online, and we also link to the League of Women Voters, Brennan Center, Take Action, ACLU, and there's a sign-up option. So keithellison.org as well, folks. Where are you at there, Natalie? Oh, Osman took over. Osman, let's get some folks up. Hang on to the microphone, Osman. Hold it.
Hi, my name is Julia. I grew up in Mexico, and when I came to Minnesota, and 41 years ago, I became a citizen at 78, I was so proud because my vote counted. And now I'm so afraid that this is not going to happen still. Then what I've been telling people is, if you think about it, what are the countries that they need voter ID? In Mexico, they need voter ID. And there's so many people, they don't have the money, they can't get it. The vote doesn't count. Oh yes, you need a photo, it's a credential, it looks like a license with your picture. But it's so many people, they don't have it, and they say, I'm not going to get it because my phone don't count anyway, and I can't get to this big city to get it. Then I keep telling people that in some socialist country, I'm not talking bad about socialist country, I don't want to use that, but if you think about it, some of those countries, if they need voter ID, they're not free to vote. We need to be still free.
Thank you, very important. Osman, let's get some more folks up. Let's get to them, Osman.
Oh, I'm Joyce Cruz, and I live within walking distance of here. Anyway, my husband was driving up to St. Cloud. We saw a billboard that said, Minnesota has the #1 fraud in the country. Very interesting. But that's not my question. My question is, turn it on. Do University of Minnesota ID cards have current addresses for most students? No. I mean, so even University of Minnesota ID cards aren't going to be good for anything, are they?
All right, let's keep going. Postpone, we need it.
My name is Mike Nolling, and I have a question for Ron. This just kind of came to my mind while we were talking here. I have an 18-year-old son that has autism, and I took him, my wife actually took him to register to vote for the first time in New Hope 2 weeks ago, and the clerk asked for a photo ID. Now, he had it because he has a state ID that I got. But my question is what kind of ID now versus later if this thing is passed? And what's that clerk out of line?
And I'm Brian Geving from Minneapolis, and just a little story at the most recent DFL caucus for the past election. One of the people in the caucus representing DFL, usually pretty educated on the issues, and we were discussing the voter ID amendment, and she was for it. It's like, and we were like, do you know what this means, don't you? And we explained it, and it's like, well, maybe that's not a good idea anymore. So it was like, so I think part of it is combating this issue of, well, it's just common sense that you have to have a voter ID, and what strategies should we use to just counteract that? Because most people think it's just common sense. Most of my family probably would think the same thing.
Good question.
My name is Robert Moyer. I'm a disabled veteran, and I work with the homeless and disabled veterans and veterans period. And a lot of homeless people think they cannot vote half the time because they're homeless and they don't have a place to stay, a permanent address. And the other half know they can vote, but they don't have no way of voting because they don't have a permanent address. And with the disabled veterans, a lot of their veterans that I know use their VA ID to vote. And I know that's going to be limited. I've been dealing with them, and they've been concerned on how this is going to be affecting them and how long this is going to be taking us to wake up to this.
Good question. Thank you. Homeless voters, okay. Osman, you're doing a good job. Keep on working.
All right, there she goes. All right.
Donna Ness. My name is Donna Ness. I am an SLPer. Proud of it. I have 2 questions. Keith, you had mentioned that in the last 2 elections that there was no voter fraud. Now, I believe you. Okay, I do. I just want to make sure which elections you're referring to and where you got that information. I have a woman sitting behind me who said there were 17,000 incidents of fraud based on same-day registration. So, you see, what I'm saying is there's numbers out there that differ, okay? Where can we go? Because people are going to be throwing out all sorts of numbers. I believe you. Where do we go? What's going to be the final word that people are going to say, oh yeah, that's true? Number 2, ALEC. If you don't know what ALEC is, you better start learning. The American Legislative Exchange Council, I believe, is probably behind a lot of this. We're going to see more and more and more of them. More of these. What can we do? I know we can boycott. Some corporations got out, but they're behind a lot of this. What can we do to stop this movement?
All right. Good job. So, Osman, how many is that so far?
This is 6. I'm just going to make a comment,
All right.
not a question. My name is Kaya Eisenberg. I'm from St. Louis Park, and I'm also an election judge in St. Louis Park. So I just want to make a comment that I don't understand how a photo ID is going to be better than a utility bill that's current and gives you the correct address of where they're living today. If you have students or other people with an ID, they can just travel back to wherever they're living and vote in that area or whatever it might be. To me, a photo ID is not going to be as helpful for me as a election judge as well as a utility bill is.
Yeah, good point. So let's answer some questions. I got my information from Mark Ritchie, from the Secretary of State.
Yes, he told an opponent of his, Stevens, what's his name? Stevenson, there's a number out there saying 17,000. Stevenson.
Well, you know, it's.
I don't believe it, but that's what people are going to be reading. Also.
Well, let me just say this about that. It is absolutely the case that people are going to be spreading false and confusing information. That is all the more reason why you and I have to be persistent, stout, and robust, just like you are, and I thank you for that. So that's one question. Alec, you're absolutely right. This is called the American Legislative Exchange Council. Many businesses join under the belief that they were going to be advocating for a pro-business agenda. That's not really what they do. These people have been behind all of these stand your ground laws. They have been behind this voter ID thing. They're really a right-wing outfit paid for by the Koch brothers to sort of shift America away from true democratic participation towards plutocracy, which is rulership of the rich. They're right. Oh yeah, by the way, he's right. They don't even take the time to adjust it to the state. They just send out model legislation and find somebody to introduce it and pass it. So 10 states have passed this stuff, 34 states have had it introduced. It is designed to do exactly what Alec over there said, not to be confused with Alec. Alex, not Alec. You know, which is to really leverage a whole bunch of policy things that are not going to help the average American person. What kind of ID do you need to register now? So you want to take that one, Steve?
Sure, I'm glad you asked that question, because right now in Minnesota we have a vouching system, especially if you went with your son. You were supposed to have been able to vouch for him without him having to show ID. If you could sign a statement under penalty of perjury saying he is who he says he is, that should have been enough. So that's key. Keith, I can't resist weighing in on one other thing. I think it's important for, since I have the mic, I can't resist, well, I want to say one thing. I think we all have to be honest about who's on the other side in terms of their very appealing argument. I don't think we can look our noses down it. It's 58% for a reason. It is a seductive, appealing argument on the surface, which is, hey, what's the big deal? In everyday life, if I want to board a plane or buy a beer, I've got to show an ID, right? That makes sense to a lot of people. And we shouldn't pretend it doesn't make sense, because it does on the surface. The problem is, as you know, that when you're boarding a plane or buying a beer, that person checking your ID does not care and does not look into the fact about whether that is a current ID showing your current address. The TSA agent isn't quizzing you about whether you really live on 123 Maple Avenue, nor are they asking whether the Oklahoma driver's license you show them, or the Indiana driver's license, or the Alaska driver's license is your real driver's license. They just want to see a picture that looks like you. Ditto for the liquor store clerk. So that's the difference. That's why it isn't common sense and why it's deadly serious for the reasons we've been talking about today. I think that's important because if you go to kitchen tables and main streets, people are going to say, and they're not wrong to say on the surface of it, that, hey, it seems to make sense to me for that reason. But I think we have good arguments in opposition.
Any more from the panel, or should we go to get more folks in? We have about 30 more minutes to get folks in. We want to get the maximum number of participants we can. But let me just ask you all a question. What is the main idea of today? What's that now? All right. Osman, let's get some more.
I'm Marilyn Rolfing. I live in St. Louis Park. And that was a perfect segue to what I want to say about action. Number one, if we don't change the majorities in our Minnesota House and Senate, they are going to put on constitutional amendments next year and the year after. So what we have to do, we have to get this amendment voted down, but we've also got to change the majorities in our Minnesota legislature. And if we don't do that, we're going to keep spinning our wheels and trying to vote down amendment after amendment.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Ann Jones from South Minneapolis. I think to that billboard thing, if you go to the Secretary of State's website, you'll see that there's a headline on an article that says, Minnesota first in convictions for voting fraud. What it means is we've got a tight system so that if there are irregularities, they can uncover it. It doesn't mean that there are a lot. The actual rate is 0.0005%, 5 to 10,000 of 1% of a chance of voter fraud in Minnesota. So you get a lot of information from the Secretary of State website. I want to ask Representative Simon, am I clear when I try to tell people, and I've done some calling with Take Action Minnesota, so I want to put a big plug in for doing the phone bank with Take Action Minnesota and those other activities to oppose this. I'm just frantic about this. But the point about the ID, even if you can go through the hassle of getting an ID, which is a hassle for a lot of people, is that at some point to get a ballot, you will have to go in person to either get an absentee ballot or present your ID to make a provisional ballot count. That's the problem for handicapped, elderly, deployed military, etc. So, and I try to tell the story of my 90-year-old father, who I'm not going to drag out on election day. He needs to be able to vote absentee. Is that correct? It has to be an in-person.
Yes.
Right.
Hi, I'm Brian. If they're really wanting us to get out there and beat Americans, why don't they change the day that we can vote? Why can't they why do we have to vote on a work day in the middle of the week? Why can't we have make it a holiday? So
the point was, very good point.
My name is Lisa, and I live in South Minneapolis. This is also an issue I'm really passionate about, and I'm probably the great-granddaughter of a suffragist. This is about disenfranchising the fringes of our society that don't get represented normally, and it takes an immense amount of work for them to even conceive of voting. If you've done registration, if you've encouraged people to vote, I've worked with campuses, I've worked on all sorts of different neighborhoods, I've registered voters, I've been an election judge. It takes a lot of effort for everyone except the privileged, like us, sitting in this room. We are privileged. We can go get those IDs, we can pay that little time fee. It's easy for me to go online and look up where I can find my birth certificate, all of that information, so easy for me. It's ex-felons who don't even know that they have the right to vote again. It's the homeless people, it's the disadvantaged with education, illiterate. But please, use those stories, all of those.
Thank you.
My name is Jules Goldstein, St. Louis Park. I'll try and talk fast. First, I was a little curious about what the effect of same-day registration is in Minnesota. Well, the Secretary of State's office does keep track of when people register to vote, the date of it. So I looked at the last 20 election days, general and primary. I went back 20 years. And I found that of the 2,336,000 people who have registered to vote within that 20 years, 2,336,874. 1,172,539 of them registered to vote on an election day. That's more than half. So I thought that's an interesting statistic.
Thank you, Jules.
I do think, though, that if the Republicans get their way, it will actually save the state a lot of money. You see, if in order to vote, you have to have a valid ID is established by law, but there is no current law. If the next legislature is as successful as the last legislature in coming up with something that the governor will actually sign, at the next election, there will be no valid ID and no one will be able to vote. Think how much money we could save if we don't have the election.
I'm sorry, I asked our volunteers to hang on to the mic, so if you could just let them hold it.
Roberta Flomster from Baptist Heights. I am a person under guardianship in this state, and I testified against voter ID last year and again this year. And what I noticed with the voter ID constitutional amendment, the clause in the state's constitution for the list of ineligible voters has a person under guardianship. I have a state ID, and I feel like my right to vote could be taken away through the voter ID.
Thank you. We got some over here, some over there, some over there.
Someone over here too.
Yeah, the Republicans say that there's too much fraud in the voting practice. It seems to me that if we're going to use a driver's license as a government-issued ID, there's a lot more fraudulent driver's license out there than there are felons that vote in the election. It might be a 10 to 1. So in essence, this is creating more fraud than exists.
Yeah, good point.
I'm Darlene White from Edina. A good resource is the July-August issue of Mother Jones. It's fantastic. The lead title is "Wanna Buy an Election? Inside the 40-Year Campaign to Sell Democracy to the Highest Bidder." And then they have about 6 pages on the rush to block the vote. It says under that, you're more likely to spot a flying saucer than a lying voter. Very good research. Another thing.
I just wanted to point out that this is not the only amendment that disenfranchises people on the ballot this year.
Time at Minnesota. I would like, for example, for tomorrow night's night out, to have a simple little sheet of paper to pass out. I won't be able to talk to everybody there, or at least it'll be a little difficult. Is there any resource, maybe League of Women Voters, that has this slip that will point all, print all the reasons against this amendment?
Hang on a second. How many is that? I think we should, let's let our panel sort of address some of the points. Let's start there. Is there sort of like a good checklist? Anybody?
The League of Women Voters does have a...
Why don't you talk in the mic and stand up?
The State League of Women Voters does have a piece that identifies the critical points on this. There are others online as well that you can find. The ones that we mentioned, the Take Action Minnesota, they have a piece that gives some critical 1, 2, 3 points. But I agree with you. In addition to passing these out tomorrow night, it is important for the... I wanted to ask the woman who did the polling, and she said of the 3, she would only get 1. But I was trying to find out from her, what are the critical questions, just so we can have that kind of information ready? What are people saying when you call?
Well, you know, if you all don't mind expanding the panel, can I get about 2 or 3 of my most prolific callers? Kiko, come on over here. You call a lot. Mona, do you do a lot of calling? Mona, don't act like I'm not talking to you. Come on up here, you guys. Andrew, you do a lot of calling? You're on the door. You're on the doors a lot, right? Right. So, Keith, why don't you come tell when this young lady is a calling machine. What are people telling you on the ID thing?
Well, I think what we hear a lot on the phones are things that have been expressed here, that people say, for example, when I told my best friend about this, she said, well, I show my ID if I'm going clubbing. So I should show my ID if I'm going to vote. That's a lot more official. And I think people don't understand. The question that I generally start with is, do you vote, have you ever voted absentee? Do you know anyone who has voted absentee? Because absentee voting would be compromised if this amendment were to pass. And that, I think, is something that people don't really think about. They don't think about the people who would be affected. You know, a lot of people think, I have a photo ID. It's not difficult for me to show my ID, and I keep it up to date. And they don't really think about people for whom that poses a real challenge and for whom that's not feasible. So that's absentee voting and same-day voter registration are 2 things that I found to be, that speak to people, that people recognize.
My interns are so smart. Andrew's not an intern, he's one of our old men on the campaign.
I got the gray hair to prove it. Yeah, so what happens, I mean, when we're making these calls, my team's made 30,000 phone calls since May 15th. We talk to people, hey, do you support the president? Absolutely. Do you support Amy Klobuchar? Definitely. How do you feel about Keith? Man, I love Keith. How about your DFL endorsed state representative at State Center? They're fantastic. Man, can we count on you to vote no on those 2 terrible amendments? I don't know, man. Voter ID sounds like a good idea. You know, when people using, you know what, you needed to go clubbing, or I needed to buy beer, or I needed to fly in a plane. The Constitution doesn't say anything about a right to fly in a plane. It doesn't say anything about the right to buy beer. But an awful lot of people did die to get the right to vote.
That's right.
And you have to have these conversations, even when these are good, strong Democrats. And I can look back and I can see that they're pro-Paul Wellstone in 1990, 22 years ago. But they still, you know, I haven't really thought about it. So that we need all of you to come and make a bunch of phone calls tomorrow. Thanks.
And by the way, this team has made 200,000 knocks or calls since the first of the year. This is Elizabeth, everybody.
Like everybody else on the calls, I'm frequently experiencing that people think it's just a common sense thing. So something that I found really effective is to talk to people about what happens if you lose your wallet, because I think that's something that everybody can relate to. Say, you know, what if you lost your wallet the day before the election and then you don't have that ID and you probably wouldn't be able to get it in time even to get your provisional ballot in. So that's something that really hits home with a lot of people and something that I would suggest as a good conversation starting point.
And I was told by the Secretary of State that on any given day, there are 30,000 people who have either lost or need a renewed license. Mona, come on up here. Mona, y'all need to help Mona come on up here. When you talk to folks about voter ID, what are you hearing? As a person who does a lot of knocking and calling.
I'm hearing the same thing that a lot of people are hearing. People think you already have your ID with you. You need it for everything else, so why don't you need it when you need to vote? And we've been using the same arguments, definitely talking about the importance of absentee voting and same-day voter registration. If you recently got married, you took on someone else's last name, or if you recently moved, you're going to have to re-register. Like sometimes you may not have your ID, so that's what we've been talking about.
How possible is it to get to the question that was just raised about tomorrow night, if we had a one-page, I know it's online and I know, but what if we had a one-page addressing the kinds of issues that somebody can come to your office and pick up tomorrow?
You know what, Matt, so interview our team about frequently used arguments, and we'll try to run some stuff off. We'll try to respond. That's a good point. Hey, can I get a hand for my campaign guys? Thanks a lot, guys. Good job.
Thank you, Keith. I'd just like to address one issue. I've heard that 17,000 figure before, and from other people as well. They talk about, or sometimes I've heard it's 20,000. Let me tell you where that figure comes from. So the next time you're at your block party or your cocktail party or whatever, and you hear that, you'll be able to rebut it. Here's where it comes from. When people in Minnesota register before the election, typically for most, I would say, the Secretary of State's office sends to their address, the address they give, a non-forwardable postcard. It makes sense that it's non-forwardable. I just moved about 5 weeks ago. So the same thing would have happened to me. It's non-forwardable, so that if they are not there, it comes back to the Secretary of State's office. It doesn't go from Maple Street to Main Street where they move. It doesn't follow them. You can't do that like you can with your utility bill, your credit card bill. It's non-forwardable. So some people have been saying, wow, 17,000 cards came back to the Secretary of State's office. That must mean fraud. No, it means people move. And it means that when they move, the cards come back to the Secretary of State's office. So people are using that as evidence of fraud, and it is not fraud. One other thing I need to point out about the fraud numbers. There's a group called the Center for Electoral Integrity, CEI. If you go to CEIMN.org. Citizens for Election Integrity, yes, thank you. And they did a study based on the 2008 election. They found 38 convictions in Minnesota for some sort of election irregularities. All 38 were felons who had registered or voted illegally, but as others have said before, this won't solve that because felons have driver's licenses. This is meant to solve a problem which we've never had a conviction for, which is voter impersonation. That's different from being a felon and voting illegally. It's an important distinction.
And the real problem it's designed to solve is Democratic majorities. We got other folks who want to say, we got about 20 more minutes left. Yep. Oh, yeah.
Hey, can everyone still hear me?
No.
I think one thing to keep in mind that's very important, the number that you should keep in your heads is 0 cases of voter impersonation fraud. Also, in answer to the questions about materials, there is a National Night Out downloadable on ourvoteourfuture.org. and that is the coalition that is designed to defeat the photo ID amendment. Also, just in this last batch of questions, a lot of things came up that I'd like to address. I think that there was a woman that talked about how she was the granddaughter of a suffragist. And it's because of people, at least in my understanding, I felt that the great progress of the 20th century was expanding our franchise. You know, because of people like Dr. Josie Johnson, who's right here. That's part of our Minnesotan traditions, expanding the right to vote. And I think that it's very un-Minnesotan to try to contract the vote and try to restrict people's ability to vote. And in 2002, there were 0 states that had photo ID laws on the books. Now in 2012, that number's above 30. I'd argue that that's no accident, right? This is part of an intentional strategy to shrink the electorate, and we can't allow that to happen. Also, I'd like to say, I think that this is evidenced by the fact that this is an intentional strategy. There are bad intentions behind this legislation because the governor and the Secretary of State and good people like Representative Simon tried to compromise with electronic polling machines. And how much traction did that get at the Capitol? None. You know, so there was no effort to compromise. You know, just because the DFL and people on our side said, you know, let's have a compromise and let's have electronic polling machines. That way nobody's disenfranchised. 0 traction in the Capitol. So the other side is not interested in keeping the right to vote active, and so we need to fight actively against that.
All right, let's get some more folks in. We got a few more hands. If you've already raised your hand, please allow someone else to go, but then we will get to you if we have more time.
My name is, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Kay Nygaard Graham. I'm from South Minneapolis. And I just wanted to clarify something for us card-carrying certifiable elderly people. If somebody has been registered since they voted for Kennedy many, many years ago, and they're on the registration documents at their polling place, and most of the polling people have seen them and recognize them, but they lose their voter ID the day before and don't have a photo ID. Do they, if this law is implemented, do they have to show a voter ID, or if they're registered, can they still vote? No. Really? So even though you've been registered for 40 years, people will have...
That's why we're upset about it.
Hi, I'm Mary from South Minneapolis. I have 2 questions. One was, I can't remember if Speaker Steve who gave a number, how much this is going to cost us taxpayers?
I only know how much it's going to cost Ramsey County because there was an article printed about it, and they said it's going to be about $2 million.
Just for Ramsey County?
Just for Ramsey County.
My other question is, my neighborhood is covered with signs saying vote no against the marriage amendment. Can we get lawn signs for vote no against voter ID?
I think that there's people working on that right now. Let me just tell you this, because the lady over there said something about this is not the only disenfranchising amendment. Obviously, we know that. I'm glad you mentioned it, though. Thank you. But I want to say that, you know, Minnesota's United for All Families, quite frankly, is doing a heck of a job. If you've seen their campaign, you can see it from outer space. But to be perfectly candid, as a person who was among the first to come out against the anti-marriage amendment, let's not call it marriage amendment, it's an anti-marriage amendment. The lesser resourced amendment is this one. And so we need you guys to get in there and volunteer, and these two things are related, and so we need your help on this, and getting lawn signs is an excellent idea and something we need to do. So thank you. I just thought I'd just dive in and mention that one. We're getting kind of short on time, so let's try to get around.
Max Valek, once you disenfranchise voters, you disenfranchise a democracy. Once you then disenfranchise a democracy, This then leads to what we had with Nazi Germany, communist Russia, dictatorships in other Latin American countries. So we have to be careful what we're doing here by disenfranchising voters. All of this is, in my opinion, a conspiracy put up by people such as the Koch brothers, getting this passed in other legislatures, and it can lead to the end of a democracy as we know it now in the United States.
Is there anyone else, is there anyone here who has not had a chance to speak yet? We want to make sure we get to everybody who has not had a chance to speak. So if you have not, please keep your hands up. Thank you.
Just real quick on the numbers of the cost, I was at the legislative sessions. It will cost statewide between 23 and 95 million for the entire state of Minnesota, depending on how you calculate it. And it is an unfunded mandate, or mostly unfunded.
Now, let me tell you, I know all of us have very important things to share, but let's try to get the people who have not had a chance yet.
If you have not spoken, please keep your hand up.
Marion Blattner from Edina. It's not just students in Minnesota, but it's absentee ballots for students who go to school outside of Minnesota, and how difficult it would be for them to vote in the state in which they're familiar with the issues. And what about snowbirds? How many of you in here go away before election day and need to vote? I don't know if there's, provisions made to that.
Good question.
Hello, my name is Lenny Nelson. I'm from South Minneapolis, and I just want to say I'm also a veteran, and I appreciate what was said about veterans. It is a shame to be able to fight for your country and not be able to vote, much less being overseas, to be able to fight and not vote. But more importantly, I just want to say that I'm a part of Isaiah, for those of you who don't know, which is one of the organizations that they did mention. And we do have a detailed 2-page handout with questions and answers that we will be using for calls as well as knocking doors when we engage personnel. So anyone that's interested, the web address is isaiahminnesota.org.
Thank you,
My name is John. I'm with St. Louis Park, and I just have 2 questions, but combined into one, and that is, I'm wondering if there are any veterans organizations and whether the AARP local organization is involved in the process of defeating this voter suppression amendment in Minnesota.
Okay, yeah, we'll get to that.
Hi, my name is Robert, and I live in South Minneapolis. Today, I was talking with my supervisor at work. We were talking about when the Norm Coleman and Al Franken debacle finally was settled. That Norm Coleman's attorney actually was heard saying that there is no voter fraud in Minnesota. And I have a question to everybody here. Does anybody know who that attorney's, what his or her name is?
Joe Friedberg.
Joe Friedberg, and where can that be cited? Where can we cite that information?
The Minnesota Supreme Court has videos of oral arguments. And
That
probably,
Okay.
Also, while you're making your way over there, let me tell you, my campaign manager, Will, where are you, by the way? Will, see that 6'8" dude right there? That's Will, he's my campaign manager. Will, you sent me a message. Can you shout out what you told me?
Yeah, so on the way out, Our Road, Our Future has a whole bunch of lit pieces here. So if you are going to a national night out and you want to be able to hand some of those out, grab some on the way out. A person with a Keith Ellison shirt will be able to hand some out to you. And if we run out here, or if you want a bigger stash or want some photo ID, vote no buttons, we'll have it at our campaign office by 2 p.m. tomorrow. And our campaign address is both on our website, keithellison.org, but it's on 26th in Franklin in the Seward neighborhood, and we'll have all of the packages for you for your night out. So we'd love to put those together for you.
Thank you, Will. Good. All right,
I have read that it was a conscious decision not to have bumper stickers and lawn signs for this campaign, and I hope after opportunities like this, maybe that strategy will turn around. I have a button that says, ask me why I'm voting no. I have a lawn sign that says, I'm voting no. What I'd like is one that said, vote no on both amendments. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Hello, I'm Dan Ryan from Brooklyn Center, Minnesota, and forgive me, I was late to this forum, but perhaps it has been mentioned already that people who have been struck by the economic hardship and are in transition and have no permanent address will suffer from this amendment. Brooklyn Center is one of the communities hardest hit by home foreclosure, and city staff informed me that there have been a great number of people who performed on their mortgages for 10 to 15 years, and in recent months have lost their homes due to job loss, one or two breadwinners in the home, and that's tragic. And then on top of that tragedy, they'll be faced with impediments to their being able to exercise their constitutional right to vote. And I think it's egregious. Thank you.
Okay, so let me just tell you, we're about out of time. Not exactly all the way out, but we're almost out. Is there anybody who has not had a chance to say anything, who would like to say something? But if we start getting to repeat comments, we're going to be here beyond the time that the Jewish Community Center has given us to be here. By the way, can we have a hand for the JCC? If you haven't had a chance to make a comment, we do want to give you an opportunity. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, is this being constitutional?
No.
Yes. And so we do need to, and so let's just see who has something they really feel they need to say before we wrap it up tonight, who has not had a chance to say anything yet so far. So I only see one hand in that regard. So I think you spoke already, my friend. Let's do this one more, and then I need you all to hang on for something that is very important.
Hi, my name is Bev Shear, and I'm a resident of North Minneapolis. What I want to ask is why the federal government isn't stepping in on these states, other than the southern states, that came under the Voters' Rights Act to yank these laws out of existence. Why do we have to wait for somebody to put forth a lawsuit because they haven't been allowed the right to vote or to register? I think the feds have a little more power than each of these states do.
Well, let me just answer that question by saying the federal government has stepped in a number of states, South Carolina, Texas, Florida. There's been a number of, in fact, I think the Justice Department should be committed on how busy they actually are. So in Pennsylvania, so you'd be very happy. Oh yeah, by the way, I think the Speaker of the House of Pennsylvania said after they passed voter ID, we got it, we're gonna win now. Anyway, so you'd be happy to know the federal government is fighting. Also, I think ARP and several vets groups are active on fighting voter ID. With that, folks, as you know, a number of people in the Milwaukee area were killed when a person associated with a hate group gunned them down. I'd like to ask you all to stand with me and observe a moment of silence. Thank you. When you go out tonight, we're going to dismiss that. When you go out tonight, think about the preciousness of freedom, democracy, and the fierce urgency of all of us coming together. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a good night.
That's so awesome experience this summer. Somebody needs to
Hello, folks. Stay tuned. This is Jakob Wheeler with the Uptake. Congressman Ellison has just finished his community forum on voter photo ID, but we're going to bring some members of the audience who spoke and said particularly prescient things over here and talk to us. We also are working on getting an interview with Congressman Ellison and Dr. Josie Johnson. So we have some attendees. How are you? We're live streaming. We're live. I hope that's great. Thanks for the opportunity. Allison, I'm just going to hand the mic off to you, okay? Oh, come on.
Okay, great. So first, tell me your name.
Michael Nowling.
And so this evening at the community forum that Congressman Ellison held, you told a story about your son and registering to vote. I'm wondering if you might tell us that story again.
I took him to register about 2 weeks ago, and he's a high-functioning autistic child, classified as disabled. And he went up to the counter himself and said he wanted to register to vote. I was with him. And the clerk was speaking directly to him, not to me, and asked him if he had any identification, and she said preferably a photo ID.
Folks, one last thing before you leave. If you
And
have
she
the
was
pledge to vote no voter ID
she was
card,
not
please
talking to
tear
me
off
or asking me
half the card,
to vouch for him.
keep
She
the
was
top part
speaking.
of your card for yourself, and give the bottom part with your name and the information to someone in an Ellison t-shirt, one of the staffers. Again, before you leave, please tear off your pledge to vote no card and give the information to an organizer.
Believe that the clerk did anything malicious.
No, I do not. She never got to the point where she asked me to vouch for him. Her conversation was directed at him first. And if that's standard procedure, I don't know. But I don't think she was malicious or violating any laws. I think she was just doing her job, and I think it was probably partially not understanding what's going on right now in terms of this amendment and in terms of the what's legal now and what's legal in the future.
So, but you're clearly taken aback by that, it sounds like.
I was, because I'm an activist. And at first it didn't even dawn on me that it was, it was just, to me it seemed routine until I was sitting here. It just seemed like a routine question until I was sitting here in this forum.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us. Can you tell me your name again and spell it for me?
Michael Nowling, Nowling.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. City of New Hope, approximately 2 weeks ago.
Thank you so much.
I don't remember the exact date.
Okay, thank you.
Do it.
Can you move it out?
Good. Hey, Chris. I gotta. What's up? Quick.
Do you know if this video is going up anywhere where I can see it?
The one that we're doing? Yeah. It's been live the whole time, and it's on the Uptake.
Hi. So tell me your name.
My name is Julia Olsen.
And you told a really good story during this community forum about, being Mexican American and being allowed to vote. I wondered if you'd share that with us again.
Well, I grew up in Mexico, and when I came here as a young adult, I started voting, and I was, once I became an American citizen, and I was very proud of, I always considered my vote counted. But now through 41 years of living here, I feel that so many things are changing, and all these amendments that they're trying to change our Constitution, I feel that we have the right to vote. And with that right, we have the freedom to choose our government, the kind of government and the kind of politicians we want. But when this freedom, with this right is taken away, the politicians, then just the people, they have the money or the power or the cars or the photo ID in this case, then they're the ones they're going to choose, and we're not. And it's so very important not to lose that right. Everybody has the right to vote. Then I feel that other countries, when they don't have free elections, it's because similar things like this, like the photo ID, then it's so important that in the United States we don't lose this. We need to have the right to vote.
Have you, as a Mexican American, have you felt sort of singled out maybe by the voter photo ID?
Well, I might be singled out now if that passes. I've been singled out just being Mexican. A couple times I've been stopped in the car thinking maybe they thought that I was illegal or I didn't have papers. I wasn't here legally. Then so far it's not too bad in Minnesota yet, but it can get bad. It can get very bad.
Where was this that you were singled out?
Just driving in the car. I was driving in Golden Valley.
Okay.
After work, I got stopped. It was no reason to be stopped. And the policeman as I asked, why did I get stopped? And he goes, oh, I think you were using your phone. And I go, no, my phone is in my bag. Maybe you were drinking your coffee. And I go, this is from this morning. This was after work. And then he didn't have any reason. And then he took my license and checked. And then they found out that it was nothing wrong.
It's terrible. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with us. Thank you. Congressman. Okay. Hi. Okay. Okay. Okay.
2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Okay. So, Congressman Ellison. Okay. How are you doing? Ellison, sorry.
You're Ellison Herrera.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Rolling.
Okay, great. So, Congressman Ellison, I always do that. So, obviously there's a lot of people in this room this evening that are, you're kind of preaching to the choir.
Yes.
But my guess is that you're holding this forum so that these people will go on and tell their friends, and those people will tell their friends. Beyond this, how do you hope to achieve that?
Well, Allison, you're absolutely right. If you notice during the forum, I kept saying the point of this forum today is action, right? I said that repeatedly. Why? Because we don't need to convince these people. We need to turn them, literally convert them into activists who are going to help us spread the word. So we gave them things that we wanted them to do, like sign a pledge card, like get information, and we shared arguments that work, which will help them to be more persuasive. So that was really the idea. This is an organizing meeting. This is a meeting of a team that is going to go out there and help us get it done.
And during the forum, a lot of people ask questions about, why shouldn't I be able to just, why wouldn't that, some people are saying that, it's just easy, just show an ID, like that's what you have to get to, get on a plane. And I imagine that you hear a lot of those comments, is that correct?
I do hear that all the time, and I agree. For probably 95 or maybe 80% of the people, for most people, that's true. But for an overwhelming number of people, that is absolutely not true. Like so many seniors, so many low-income people, so many students, so many people who lose a license, so many servicemen and women who are serving this country. I mean, for so many people, it's not true. And so what we're asking people to do is to stop saying that it's true because it's true for me. No, what's true for you is not necessarily true for everyone. So the way it's been working is working, so we don't need to change it. And all this stuff about fraud is lies.
Yeah. And the opposition would say, well, don't you value the integrity of our election system? This is going to make it better. This is going to improve the integrity of Minnesota's electorate.
Yeah, my argument is that is false. It's going to diminish the integrity of the election because it will mean fewer people will be able to participate. Fewer Americans who, in fact, have every right to vote other than this artificial, brand new claim of needing an ID.
Yeah. So I hear that you're going to be holding other forums like this in other communities.
Yeah, we're going to be holding other forums. We hope the Uptake can join us. The Uptake is the best media outlet around, and if you guys can be part of what we're doing, we can get the word out, and it's an honor to be on your show because you're so very in touch with the people.
Thank you so much, Congressman Ellison.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, Keith, can I call your office to get information about roads? Yeah. Because I think that would be the better way. Okay, yeah, please do. Is that your son? That's sweet. Here, let me get a chair.
My, right?
My. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Mai. Thanks for doing this.
No problem. Great. Here, I'll kneel down. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, tell me your name.
My name is Thor, and I'm an organizer with Congressman Keith Ellison.
And why did you joined the panel today to talk specifically about the issues facing voters who would have to show a photo ID that are disabled. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons why Keith stands out on this issue, in addition to the fact that he's just been such a great advocate for voting rights, is the fact that he really has been the only elected official to really address the fact that people with disabilities will be impacted by this issue. And I think a lot of people just forget the fact that people with disabilities are actually the country's largest minority, because we cross boundaries. We can be any race or any age, because, for the most part, you will probably know someone or yourself acquire a disability sometime in your life. So it's great that Keith is kind of like the person who has really been addressing the fact that photo ID is going to be impacting people with disabilities, because so many people just don't know that it really is a big issue.
Can you tell me how they're going to be impacted? I at one time did work for a man who was disabled, and tell me a little bit about if you live independently, what kind of things you have to do to be able to get to to the DMV, to be able to get the license. Just walk me through what that would take a person who is wheelchair bound and doesn't have their own car, and relies on somebody else for transportation.
Yep. Well, I can probably just give you an example, and I'm just kind of throwing this out there. If you are a person who, say, needs support living in a group home, and you rely on an employee of that group home to help you with, just your daily living, you're gonna, first of all, require that person to help you get to the DMV. Probably, if you don't even have the proper papers to, even show the DMV in order to get your ID, you're going to have that person help you find all that stuff. And I think that in addition to all of that, you're going to have to schedule a time to do it. It could be that it might not even be a person who works at that group home. It could be that the individual would have to find someone from their family to take them, because, it could be a day when there's just no staffing. And so, it does take a lot of time. For the most part, individuals who need support like that wouldn't even have their ID on them anyway if they were to have ID, because a lot of that information is just kept for them for when they need it. So it's not like a person, who lives in a group home would automatically just have ID on them anyway, wherever they are. Because as you heard tonight, the individual who is under guardianship, a lot of people under guardianship, may or may not have the information ready anyway on their person. So, it's very complicated. I know that just for myself, I'm ashamed to say this, but my tabs were 3 months overdue. And, that's not an ID issue, but definitely I needed to have my ID in order to do it. And I had to go down to the DMV, and it took all day, just for that, And I can't even imagine what it would be like if I needed ID, how long that would have taken. But it was just a hassle. And if you don't have transportation and you rely on someone to help you, either your family or, maybe someone who provides support for you, it's going to be even more complicated. Or if you take public transportation or Metro Mobility, that's going to take a while. And
you have to schedule that in advance.
Absolutely, if you don't take the bus and you take Metro Mobility, you have to wait at least, I think it's 5 days ahead of time in order to do that. So it's really complicated. And if you live in outstate Minnesota, where there are less modes of transportation that are accessible, and little to no services on the weekends and evenings, it's even more difficult. So, yeah, I think that the whole requirement is just another burden, you know. And people with disabilities have really worked hard, at least in the state of Minnesota, with the legislature on, you know, passing good laws and making laws that, you know, actually make it easier for people with disabilities to vote. And now this is going to be just a huge step backwards if this amendment is passed.
Thank you so much for talking with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Sorry. Oh,
Thank you so much, Mike.
that was great.
Representative Simon, I think, is coming on over here.
Oh,
for
great.
interview. Let me
You
switch to lower thirds.
do the interview this time.
Okay.
Hi, Representative Simon. Good to see you too. We just, so for the, I guess it was a hearing on July 17th, we had a full recap, legislative recap of Kiffmeyer, you, Senator Newman, and a bunch of other people talking about the voter ID during the 2012, quite a battle, and I wanted to point that out to folks, but I just felt like that wasn't really appropriate. So, Jakob, you're going to do the interview this time.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Here's a card, by the way. Great. Thank you. Allison, I just want to make sure that actually, I can do this myself, make sure that you can see us. Technology these days. Thanks, Representative Simon. Wanted to ask you, I mean, Representative Ellison, or Congressman Ellison spoke to this, that the anti-marriage amendment has gotten so much more play among the progressive community, really across all political spectrums. I mean, why is it? I suppose on one level it's easier for people to understand and easier for people to get excited or upset about than this. This seems so complex, right. Voter ID or voting disenfranchisement. I mean, what has to happen for people to understand this viscerally?
Well, I think you really touched on something. One is the complexity. Mm-hmm. The other, though, is the fact that, let's face it, the poll numbers have been really neck and neck in the other amendment. Here they've been a little more lopsided, and I think that might have discouraged some people earlier on from getting involved. But they're both very important, and I think the more people learn about this issue, the more they understand what's at stake, and the more they understand what's really flawed about putting this in the Constitution. Mm-hmm. As I've said, you know, when you put something in the Constitution, you're writing basically in permanent ink. You can't revise, you can't amend, you can't go back and change and improve. It's very, very difficult. And so I think it's kind of all or nothing here, so the stakes are really, really high.
A big part of our legal and criminal justice system in the United States, and really in Western democracies for hundreds of years, has been we have ways to convict people who commit crimes, but we make sure we have ways to prevent innocent people from being convicted of crimes, or innocent people of being put to death if they didn't commit a crime. But here, it seems like there's so much attention on the right here, focused on making sure people who shouldn't vote, who they believe shouldn't vote, don't get to vote. But what about the attention on, you know, those who ought to be able to vote? Who's protecting them? Who's standing up for their rights?
Well, I think you're touching on a key thing, which is overkill and overreach here. Mm-hmm. This really is, to use the shop-worn phrase, this is killing a fly with a bazooka. There is a tiny, 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 tiny amount of so-called fraud. In 2008 election, there were 38 documented cases, 38 convictions in Minnesota, and they were all felons who either registered or voted illegally, 38 out of a state of 5 million. And that is not worth upending our very successful, envied election system, whether it's same-day voter registration, whether it's mail-in absentee ballots, or whether it's just expanding the pie. It's not worth it for 38 people. It really isn't. It is overkill and it's overreach, and I think people are going to have to understand that.
Mm-hmm. There were some comments from the crowd tonight, that a lot of what ALEC and what the Koch brothers are pushing, right-wing agendas across the country, both amendments here are really used to get out right-wing or Republican voters. But it's really kind of almost a reaction to having an African-American president, and a reaction to what perhaps the Republican base sees is losing their country. I mean, do you feel like this is a right-wing kind of demagoguery reaction nationwide, or do you feel that it's not as black and white as that?
I'll tell you, I don't know about the partisan aspect, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative. except in this sense. I know what it's like as a Democrat to be on the wrong side of a very, very close election. And that was Bush versus Gore in the year 2000. We who are progressives, who are Democrats, we know what that's like. And I know from that time, it wasn't that long ago, it was only 12 years ago, that there were people in my party who overreacted to that result, alleging all sorts of crazy, weird, wacko conspiracies about the Bush family buying up the election machines and everything like that. That, too, was an overreaction. I think we're seeing, as a result of the Coleman-Franken fight and as a result of the Emmer-Dayton fight, a similar kind of overreaction. It hurts to lose an election. It hurts even more when it's very, very close. And it tends to make people do things and say things and push for things that they otherwise wouldn't. And I think there's some of that in play here.
How closely have you followed, this is the last question, I know you've got to run, how closely have you followed the state Supreme Court justices, the hearings that have gone on, the lawsuits against Ritchie for trying to clarify, in the titles to these amendments? I mean, and based on what the justices have said in the courtroom, where do you think they're going to go? How do you think they might rule?
Well, I've tried to follow it as best I can. And it seems to me, based on just what I read and what I hear, and talking to a couple people who are actually in the courtroom, that they think there's a better chance than not that the court will uphold the titles for both amendments that the Secretary of State has issued. A, because he's got the authority to do it, and B, because there's really no standard. If you concede that he has the authority to do it, there's really no standard for determining that it's somehow illegitimate. And he seems to have done his best to try to clarify and not obscure.
Might the court throw out voter ID, or might it throw out the anti-marriage amendment? And if so, even though you're a Democrat, is that an affront to a lawmaker that the Supreme Court would throw out something that lawmakers have passed, albeit Republicans in this case?
That's a great question. I think not necessarily. I think there's more of a chance that the voter ID will be either thrown out or severely limited or something like that than there is the marriage amendment, because there's that other issue of the ballot question that's put to the ballot. And I think there's a fairly strong case to be made that the question itself is misleading as to the voter ID amendment. And so there's always that chance that if the court concludes that that's the case, they have a range of remedies available to them. The sort of harshest remedy would be to throw the whole thing out, like they did in Missouri for a time. Another remedy would be for the court to say, we're going to rewrite the question. And yet another remedy would be for the court to say, well, we're not going to rewrite it nor throw it out. We're going to just toss it back to the legislature to rewrite it. So there's a range of options the court would have. What they're going to do, it's anyone's guess.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks for your time.
Sure, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Yep.
Thanks, gang.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Allison Herrera and Jakob Wheeler about to sign off from St. Louis Park. Thanks for watching.